This is the Christ.
Welcome to the final class of our new members class. We're so excited that y'all are here. And before we do begin, I want to make sure, is everyone available to be here on Sunday to actually join the church? Is there anybody who's not here, will not be able to be here this Sunday, October 31st?
10:30 service.
The 10:30 service, correct. We're also going to be baptizing 2 beautiful babies. And y'all are going to join the church, and it's going to be a delightful, joyful, hopeful Sunday. So that's great. Pastor Damon has joined us. Most of you, I assume, at some point or another have met Pastor Damon, but I wanted you all to see him and meet him. And so he's here.
I am corporeal form.
You want
To be seen and heard.
tell us a little bit about yourself. What do you do here at the church, or whatever you think is a relevant detail, Damon?
Oh, you've left me a dangerous opening, Greg.
Indeed. As I'm prone to do.
Yeah, my name is Damon Jensen Heightman. I serve as the associate pastor here at First Presbyterian Church, Hastings, Nebraska. I grew up in Iowa. I went to undergrad. I can't quite remember where I went to undergrad.
Let's see.
Somebody will remember for me at some point in time. Then I completed my seminary work at United Theological Seminary in the Twin Cities. And worked in Little Falls, Minnesota as a pastor for a few years before I came to Hastings to serve as the chaplain at Hastings College. And I did that for a few years and then before switching over to here. So here at the church, I do a few things. I organize some of the adult enrichment opportunities. I work with the senior high youth. I work with the mission committee and with congregational life and other things as assigned or requested or needed, as the case might be. And what else?
Damon, you see him leading worship with me almost every Sunday. Damon also preaches once a month, and he's a great preacher. And we have very different preaching styles, so that's a blessing for this church to be able to hear different voices.
I still think of you as a newlywed. Sorry.
I don't think you have to apologize for that. I got married last September to Hannah Jensen Heightman. So she was Jensen at the time.
And you, we assume we're Heightman.
Yeah.
All right.
So is that it?
I think that's it.
All right.
Thank you, Damon.
Thank you.
See y'all later.
Thank you.
Lasagna for dinner if anybody's interested.
Yes, so you all are invited to join us for dinner Wednesday nights. We have programming with youth, our children, and we do a dinner every Wednesday night. And the tradition of our new members class that we started a few years ago was to have you all join the kids for dinner. And so we got lasagna and garlic bread and fresh baked brownies. But if you're hungry now, there's a tray of cookies in the back from the Congregational Life Committee. We keep you well fed here at First Presbyterian Church. And
Matthew already grabbed the cookie.
oh, you did?
Yeah.
We can have another one. There's 2 dozen. You good? Wow, that's some self-control, buddy. All right, so I'm going to briefly go over our First Presbyterian Church staff. So just so you all are aware, we actually only have 4 full-time staff here at the church. So it's myself and Pastor Damon, and then Sarah Allen, who's a member of the class here with us. And then also Tony Calhoun, who's our facilities manager. We have this building here, which is about a 35,000 square foot facility. And we also own what's called the old middle school annex across the street. We call that the Peace Center, which is about another 35,000 square feet. This building was built in 1912. That one was built in 1915. So we're delighted to have a facilities manager who knows how to deal with these things. So those are your 4 full-time staff, me, Damon, Sarah, and Tony. Then we have 2 half-time staff, Rose Kep, who is our director of Christian education, who you met the first week of class and is out running our Christian education programs today. And then Linda Volweiler, who is our organist and also our coordinator of music. And then we have a variety of part-time staff. So Deb Hamburger is our part-time bookkeeper. Dan Deffenbaugh, we call him our scholar in residence. He teaches a lot of our adult ed, but he also dreams with me and Pastor Damon on how to put together adult ed that is coherent. Dan is was a religion professor at Hastings College, and a brilliant guy. If you flip your sheet over, this is all of our music staff besides Linda. All these folks are pretty part-time, but also very much a part of the life of the church. So Dr. Byron Jensen directs our adult bell choir and our youth bell choirs. Dr. Robin Kuzer directs our adult chancel choir. Dr. Susan Oliver, those guys both have doctorates in music. Susan Oliver's doctorate is actually in cellular biology, but we still call her doctor. She directs our little kids bell choirs. For those of you who were in worship on Sunday or watched worship on Sunday, the little kids bells rang for the introit and the anthem and did a great job. Susan does a great job with them. Linda Johnson is our director of youth choirs. We call them the Calvin Westminster Youth Choirs. And then Tim and Teresa Kennedy are the directors of our little kids choirs, our Praise and Hallelujah children's choirs. So those are your paid church staff. But as we've talked about, for a church this size, with all the programs we have going on, it has a lot to do with our members, with you. And so I'm gonna hand out the other. And if you've ever noticed on our bulletin, we list the staff in the staff block, but it says the head of the church, Jesus Christ, and then the ministers are all of you, the members. And then we have some paid staff, but this is your job, right? And so we do things by committee. And I've mentioned this, I think, the past couple of weeks, but not necessarily always the most efficient way to accomplish things, but we do believe always the most faithful way to accomplish things. We have a leadership council in the church that is called a session. And they are elected, it's 12 people, and they're elected to 3-year terms on a rotating cycle. So the session is responsible for leading the church along with me. I moderate the session, but the session ultimately is the decision-making body for the church. We also have a group of officers called trustees who oversee property and finance. So they're the ones who help me build the budget, and then they're the ones who work with Tony to oversee these wonderful properties we have. And then the other set of elected officers are called deacons. This is the caring and compassion ministry of the church, right? One pastor would have a difficult time being able to reach 500 people on a regular basis. And so we have these deputized pastors, 15 deacons. This board of deacons oversee the caring and compassion ministry of the church. And so those are the elected officers, session trustees and deacons. And then under those, you have a lot of different committees, and the church runs on committees and committee work. And so the Congregational Life Committee you've become familiar with because they've been feeding you each week. But they're the ones who do a lot of our fellowship activities. We've got a Christian Education Committee. We actually have both an adult and a children's Christian Education Committee. We have our Mission Committee. We call it Global Mission and Local Witness. We have an ad hoc Communication and Technology Committee that meets when needed. We have Go and Serve. That's our annual youth mission trip. I don't know if you all have heard about this, but this church has been running a youth mission trip since 1969, which is really kind of unusual. The short-term mission trips really started in earnest in the United States in the mid to late 90s. I went on my first mission trip when I was a senior in high school in 1996. We went to the Navajo Reservation and did some work there. This church was prophetic. They were thinking about this way back in 1969. And that first youth mission trip, they called it Go and Serve. They loaded into a station wagon, and they also drove to a Native American reservation up north. And that started a tradition of Go and Serve. And this church has run that youth mission trip every summer since 1969. When we go into the fellowship hall, when we do a tour of the church, you'll see a wall. And there's a plaque for each year that they've done it. Most of them have photos. Some of them are missing photos because they were so engaged in service, they forgot to take a group picture, or at least we don't have one. But you've got the names of the participants and where they went. And this is a really central part of the identity of this church, this Go and Serve mission trip. So We've got our Worship Arts and Music Committee. Worship Arts and Music is a big part of this church. We are a church that prides ourselves in our music program, and also in our worship services and in the arts. And so Worship Arts and Music Committee is a busy committee. We have something called the Memorial Committee. I mentioned how this room came to be, the Lydia Room. That would be the Memorial Committee. When someone passes away and a donation is made to the church, the Memorial Committee stewards that. We have a Scholarship Committee and a Nominating Committee. The Nominating Committee is the folks who are going to call you in a year or two to say, hey, remember when you learned about session in your new members class? We have an opening on session. Would you like to join us? As you know, so Nominating Committee is the one who does that. Then we have a Personnel Committee who just helps me to help manage our staff. So that's kind of the org chart of the church. If you flip that sheet over, you'll see the org chart of the Presbyterian Church USA, and it looks very similar. You have churches that roll up to a presbytery, presbyteries roll up to synods, and synod to our General Assembly. So we have a national governing body called a General Assembly. It meets every 2 years, and they set the direction of the church at the General Assembly meetings. And we have a General Assembly coming up next summer of 2022. And so that's how that works. And at some point, if you're really interested, you can get involved in the national work of the church. We have a member every year, our Presbyterian, which is the gathering of 36 churches in central Nebraska. Every year there's a General Assembly. We send one pastor and one elder to go represent us at the General Assembly. In the last General Assembly, it was a member of this church who went. And historically, this church has been really involved in the work of the national church, dating back to a longtime pastor named Cy Kessler. Cy served this church for about 30 years. And Cy went to the General Assembly as a pastor and was elected to the highest office of the church. He was the moderator of the General Assembly, which means that you oversee that particular meeting, and then you're in that office until they meet again. So he was the highest elected officer of the National Presbyterian Church, right here from Hastings, Nebraska. So that's pretty cool. But amongst all of this, and you've heard me talk about this, so I'm going to be repeating myself, is this idea that all of you are ministers, all of you are engaged in the ministry and mission of the church, not just the professional paid staff, but it is your church, and you are all part of that. And that is grounded in this notion of the priesthood of all believers from 1 Peter 2, where it reads, come to him a living stone, though rejected by mortals, yet chosen and precious in God's sight, like living stones. Let yourselves be built into a spiritual house, to be a holy priesthood, to offer spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God. But you are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's own people, in order that you may proclaim the mighty acts of him who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. And so that is your call as Christians, to be proclaimers and shiners of God's marvelous light into the world. And we gather together as the church because we recognize that there is an exponentially more powerful impact when we do this together. And we support each other, and we hold one another accountable, and we work together to shine the love and light of Christ into our community. And that's why we're here. This final thing that is in front of you, I'll share with you. I asked the question, what does it mean to be a Presbyterian to a new members class? This was 3-4 years ago. And a member didn't have an answer at the time, but she went through the new members class, and then she writes on a blog, and she wrote a blog reflecting on that question after having been through the members class and after having participated in life in the church. And I'm just going to read this out loud to you because I think it says it better than I can. This is Jenny Welsh. Jenny and Ben are members of the church. They have 5 children, all named after presidents. So if you hear Reagan or Truman or, hold on, Lincoln, Wilson,
Madison,
and Madison. No, there's no Madison.
no,
It's Reagan, Truman, Lincoln, Wilson, and Harrison.
oh,
Harrison is the oldest. He's in 6th grade. So 6th grade on down to Wilson, who's now 3. So there, and Ben is a teacher at the high school, and Jenny is an English professor. She teaches for a couple of online schools from Hastings. So Jenny wrote this. You see, as I listened to the others in our group do their own introductions, I realized they were all about touching on the very messages or themes I've written about before when I've blogged about church, namely concepts of love and service. Love and service. It may have been the invitation of friends and the desire to have a church home for our family that initially brought us in the doors. But it's this particular church's driving forces of love and service that kept us coming back and ultimately led us to become official members this summer. And not just lip service either, but actions, actual in the world service, which is where my heart lies. After chewing on these questions for the last few days and learning more and more about the larger church itself and the actual congregation here we are now officially a part of, I once again land at the conclusion that we're fortunate to be where we are in this community that lives not only by faith, but also by love and service. This is the message, the work, and the spirit we want to surround our children with as they grow, and it's how we want to be in the world too. I know you have that in front of you. I'm reading it out loud because we're also recording the class for those who can't be here, but I really appreciated that reflection, and it spoke to my heart about what we are as the church and why we're here. So I share it with you. Any questions about anything I presented today or anything that came up over the last 2 weeks that you're like, you said this, but I wasn't sure, or it's gonna make this very easy for me?
Can you remind me what the foundation?
Yeah, oh, I didn't mention that. So yes, the little dotted line to the foundation. So in early 2000, the church had money invested in accounts, and they decided that it would be better to separate it out as a separately incorporated nonprofit that exists exclusively to invest the resources of the church to make sure that they're well invested, and then to, when the church needs to call upon those resources. And so we have a foundation. And so a lot of folks, when they've passed away, have left money to the church, and that money goes into the foundation. And then that money is available to us when we need it. Some of that money is restricted and can only be used for certain things. For example, there was a beloved member of the church named Luella Langenberger. She's actually, this interesting story. Luella was a pastor's wife. Her pastor was Reverend Landenburg. And he served his first church in Bentonville, Arkansas. Does anybody know what's headquartered in Bentonville, Arkansas?
Walmart.
Walmart. So his parishioner was Sam Walton, and Sam offered his pastor some stock options as a way to thank him. And so this Presbyterian pastor, Reverend Langenberger, received these stock options from Sam Walton when Walmart was not much more than a small store in Bentonville, Arkansas, but was planning on expanding. So the Langenbergs retired out here in Hastings, Nebraska, and eventually he passed away, and then Luella passed away. And Luella had been part of this church and believed deeply in this church's music ministry and thought music was a very effective way to proclaim the love of God in the world. And so when she passed away, the stock options were sold and put into trust for the church. And so we have these funds that we call the Landenburg Funds, which can be used for the music ministry of the church. So that's a pretty neat legacy that she leaves. And that's a significant portion, about a little over a quarter of the foundation is the Landenburg Funds. And so we learned different ways. We've come up with different and creative ways to use that. One of the ways we do that is to support the music ministries of the church, is supporting kids in the church. And so if you're a member of this church and your children take music lessons, then every semester you can apply and get a scholarship to help offset the cost of your children's music lessons. And it's an investment in the future music ministries of this church. And so for those of you who have kids who are in piano lessons or any other voice lessons or any other musical lessons, those funds are available. Those of you who will eventually have kids who are that age, those funds are available, and they're available to any member of the church. So that's one way we use it. There's lots of other really creative ways that we use that, but the Landenburg Funds do fund the scholarship ministry, as well as things like maintaining our organ and other things. So yeah, that's the foundation. Good question.
Does the session operate, or is the session in charge of the foundation and those funds, or is the foundation a set of members of a separate, or
Yeah.
a separate entity?
So the foundation is a separate entity, is a separately incorporated nonprofit, but their charge is they exist to fund the ministries of the church. So they largely, the foundation board doesn't make decisions about how the money is spent. They just make decisions about how the money is invested, and then how much money is sent from the foundation to the church each year. And then the session and the trustees determine how that money is actually spent.
Are the church members the ones that are part of the foundation?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep, the foundation board is made up of church members
Gotcha.
as well. So generally folks with some degree of financial literacy, which is not, I'm like ex officio on that. And they talk about basis points and I sort of glaze over. And then they say, this is how much money that we'll fund for music program. Okay. And then we carry on. So, yeah. And speaking of funding, that's a good segue. So the church is entirely funded by donations from the members. We do not get any money from the national church to fund the work we're doing here. In fact, it's the opposite of that. We send money to the national church to fund the work. We also send money to the Presbytery, which is that governing body that oversees all the churches in our area. And we're the largest Presbyterian church in central Nebraska by a significant margin. And so we fund the work of the Presbyterian, which actually supports a lot of these smaller churches. And we see that as part of our role because we're a connectional church. And so some of these smaller churches have needs. And so we send our money on to the Presbytery, and the Presbytery disperses that money to these smaller churches that may not have a foundation, may not have had the Landenburg family leaving money to them. And so so we give a portion of our church's budget every year to the Presbytery and to the national offices. And then all of the rest of everything that happens in this church is funded by our members. And so each year we do what's called a stewardship campaign, where we invite people to make an estimate of giving for the following year. And that allows us to build our budget so that we know how much money we might be taking in. So we know how many people we have on staff and what programs we can fund and what facilities we can do and that sort of thing. So normally I don't run the new members class at the same time I'm running a stewardship campaign. I don't want to think that we're always asking for money because we're not, but we do need that. And so we are in the middle of the stewardship campaign. For any of you who have watched church or attended church in the last 3 weeks, we've been talking about this from the pulpit. And so I'll hand out stewardship letters to each of you and just encourage you and your families to go home, read through these and pray over them and decide what level of commitment you all can make for this year. And we'll go from there. So we'll do one for each family.
What's your fiscal year?
Fiscal year is the calendar year. Yep.
How many presbyteries are there in the state?
In the state, we have, I already did one. Yep. You've already got one.
I think that one. Just in case.
Perfect, thank you. In the state, we have Presbyterian boundaries sometimes overlap state lines. And so we have two major presbyteries, the Central Nebraska Presbytery, which we're in, and the Presbytery that oversees Lincoln and Omaha. But there's also the Missouri River Valley Presbytery, which overlaps a little bit in Omaha and the southern Nebraska. And then we have the Presbytery of Plains and Peaks, which is primarily northern Colorado, but overlaps into the panhandle of Nebraska. So there's kind of, we touch 4 presbyteries in Nebraska. You asked the question, right?
Mhm.
Yeah. So that's how that works. Presbyteries are fascinating things. As somebody, so I was ordained to ministry through Denver, and to say that the Denver Presbytery and the Central Nebraska Presbytery are the same body is an interesting thing, because we have 36 churches in our presbytery, but of those 36 churches, only 15 of them have full-time called installed pastors like me. And only one church is big enough to have an associate pastor like Damon, which is this church. If you go over to Denver, there are 96 churches in that presbytery and a dozen churches that have multi-staff churches with 2 or 3 associate pastors. And so it's just a very, very different feel. Our presbytery geographically is huge. We cover an enormous geographic area, but in terms of the number of churches and the number of actual Presbyterians, it's a very small number. The largest presbytery in the United States by number of Presbyterians and churches is the Atlanta Presbytery, where I came from. And so when you would go to an Atlanta Presbytery meeting, and Presbytery meetings are always half elders, people who are serving on session, and half pastors. They try to keep that balance to run the church, that it's not the pastors making all decisions, but it's an even balance between the pastors and the elders. And Atlanta Presbytery meetings would have 400 to 500 people at them. So 200 pastors and 200 elders. Our Presbyterian meetings typically have 40 people at them, 20 pastors and 20 elders, and that's about it. So it's an interesting thing, but the idea is that we're a connectional church, right? That we're better together and that we can support one another in ministry. And so that's the underlying idea. And there's also an accountability piece. If this church had a falling out with me, they would go to the Presbyterian. The Presbyterian would help with that conflict. And that's a gift, both to me as a pastor, but also to this church to have this body that's willing to intervene and help in that way. Whereas other churches don't necessarily have that kind of denominational structure. So hopefully that'll never happen.
So there's really, the head of the presbytery would be the someone with the general assembly with that. Is there an individual that is
Yes, there's an individual called an executive presbyter. And so she has an office in Kearney. And sometimes she's called the pastor to the pastors. So she helps make sure all the churches in our region are taken care of, and then all the pastors in the region are taken care of. And so, yeah, that's
similar to a bishop?
similar to a bishop, except without the authority of a bishop. She can't dictate what we're doing here. Whereas the bishop in the Episcopal system can tell St. Paul's or St. Mark's Cathedral, this is what you're doing, this is how you're doing it. For example, COVID precautions. The bishop dictated how the Episcopal Church dealt with COVID. All the Episcopal churches in Nebraska, the bishop dictated that policy. We as a session discerned our COVID policy each month and weren't given a directive by the presbytery. And so each Presbyterian church looked at their own community conditions and their own church and made a decision for themselves how they would respond to COVID. That's the most recent example, but there are other.
So then there must be someone that probably is directs or at least communicates or collaborates with that person in Kearney
Yes,
outside of the presbytery.
yes. So that presbyter is part of a council of other presbyters, but they don't report to anyone in terms of an authoritative structure, but they collaborate together. And so there's 117 presbyteries across the United States. And so she works most closely with the other executive presbyters in this region in the Midwest, but she also collaborates with them. And then they often will collaborate with Louisville, which is where the denomination is headquartered. They all go to General Assembly, and then they'll take the directives from General Assembly back and that sort of thing.
So was that person elected and just there for 3 years, like within her church, or is she there? Hired.
She's more like a pastor. So she's appointed by the council of the presbytery to serve in that role as long as they want her and as long as she wants to be there. And that's the same is true with me. So the church called me to be the pastor here. And as long as I want to be here and as long as the church wants me to be here, I will be here. I will not be moved by the denomination or the presbytery. Different from a Lutheran system or a Methodist system or an Episcopal system. The local church has the control over that. And so this church has a history of relatively long pastorates. Well, the longest being Cy Kessler, and he served from 1947 till 1977.
Wow.
And then he retired from this church and he served as an interim. Presbyterian churches, when they have a transition of pastors, often they'll hire an interim pastor to serve in that time between pastors. And so Cy did interim work around the Midwest for a number of years and then retired here to Hastings. And then I think he passed away in 2007, but really had a big influence in this community. Y'all were here when Cy was here, weren't you?
He came to Fairfield.
Yeah,
And yeah, he preached there a few times.
yeah.
I think he probably lived next door to where we live. I don't know.
Where do y'all live?
On North Cedar.
Yes, yep, he did. His name, his wife was Ruth, and she outlived him by a few years, but I think eventually ended up in a nursing home.
Sometimes when I say things I shouldn't, I get kind of a little strike from the north.
It makes sense. It makes sense. All right. Any other questions? So my plan is to do a brief walk around the church. So y'all can get to know the facility a little bit. And then we're going to join, for those that you would like, we're going to join the kiddos for dinner in the fellowship hall. As I said, every Wednesday night we do this thing called Wednesday Night Live. So from 4 to 6 o'clock, it's all the first graders through fifth graders. And they do a rec time, they do choir, they do bell choir, and they do a Bible study, and then they end up in the fellowship hall at 6. And then our youth also can show up at 6 to get dinner. And so then you got the youth interacting with the children. And there's also table parents that sit in there and help facilitate that meal. And then the kids go home at 6:30 and the youth stay, and youth do choir and bell choir, and then they do church youth group on Wednesday nights. At the same time, we also have music ministries going on Wednesday nights. So our adult choir rehearses on Wednesday nights at 6:45, and then our adult bell choir rehearses, I think, at 7:30 on Wednesday nights. So this is a busy, active place on Wednesday nights, and we get to see a little bit of that. Is there anybody who doesn't want to stay for dinner? It's okay if you don't.
I won't be able to do that.
That's totally fine. Okay. So, and I'll encourage you all to spread out amongst the tables and interact with the kids and the other adults who are there if you feel comfortable. Your kids are welcome to come. I think Tyler, your kids are going to come join us as well.
Yeah, we're kind of required at this point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good. So, yeah, I mentioned that the base structure of the church where the sanctuary is, that was built in 1912 after a fire that had burned it down in 1910. This church started in a small wooden structure, and then they built the original sanctuary. The church was founded in 1873. Small wooden structure, and they built the sanctuary. Sanctuary burnt down in 1910. They rebuilt it in 1912. So the sanctuary has been there since 1912. And then there have been additions. They added on the fellowship hall and the chapel, which we'll go see in the 1950s. And then where we're sitting, this Christian education wing was added on in the early 1970s. Before that, as I understand it, there were a few houses along here that fronted Burlington. And like there was the Sunday school house for 1st through 3rd graders. So the kids will all go out to the house and take Sunday school inside the house. And so they leveled all the houses and built the Christian ed wing. So this is the newest part of this building, built in the 1970s. On this main floor, we've got this adult education room, and then we have a few rooms that are designated for a new project we're calling the Hastings Community Music Academy. And so there's a piano teacher, Jensen, Heightman, Damon's wife, who has a studio here, and then a couple of classrooms where we do music classes that are part of this Hastings Community Music Academy, which is a collaboration of First Pres and this Community Music Academy. The upper floor here is all Sunday school rooms for kids. So at the far end is the pre-K through 1st grade, and then they get older as they progress down here until you get to the room right above here, which is the confirmation room, which is where the 8th graders do confirmation. And then the 2 rooms on the end are music rooms. One's a choir room and one's the handbell room. I don't think we need to go up there unless y'all really want to see it. In the basement here of this building, we've got the middle school youth room. So the middle school youth meet over here, and it's a really fun, brightly painted room with all sorts of fun things like foosball tables and that sort of thing. And then also we have the choir room where our chancel choir rehearses. So it's the kids choirs and youth choirs rehearse up here, and the adult choir rehearses down in the basement. And there's a variety of other rooms in the basement that aren't really utilized much. The Boy Scouts are down there. This church has hosted Troop 200 for many, many years. So there's a Boy Scout room in the basement. There are also bathrooms in the basement that have showers, because in the summertime, we occasionally host mission teams that are coming out here, either working in Nebraska or passing through on their way to go do mission, kind of an extension of our Go and Serve. When we send our kids out, occasionally we're also supporting kids that are coming through here, or adults. And so we've got cots and stuff that we can set up in the youth room down there, and there's bathrooms and showers and that sort of thing. So any of y'all want to see any of that? Are you good? I will say this church is a little bit like a labyrinth. My experience is that churches and hospitals build when they have money to do so, and there's no like master plan. And so they'll put a wing on here and then a wing over here, and then so unless you've got a map, navigating it can be really hard. And then it's not on the same scale as a hospital, but this church is definitely that way. And so it will be easy to get lost the first couple times you're in here if you're looking for like, where do I drop my kids off for Sunday school, or where's the nursery or whatever, but you'll get the hang of it. So we'll take a tour, we'll go see the chapel space. And does anyone want to go across the street and see what we call the Peace Center, the middle school annex? So I'll give a brief history on that, and then we'll take off and go look. The Hastings Middle School is the big brick building over here, and then you've got the big parking lot and then the old middle school annex. And Hastings Middle School moved to the edge of town in 2008, and the church went ahead. They wanted the parking lot, and then also this was a time when other churches in town, like North Shore, had basketball gyms, and they thought, oh, this would be great for fellowship and a great facility. So why don't we? So they bought the whole thing from the school district, immediately sold off the old middle school building, which had about $12 million of deferred maintenance in it, which we didn't have the money to do anything with. Kept the parking lot and kept the annex, which we've renamed the Peace Center. And we've turned that into a community center, a center for ministry and mission. And so in the annex, in the Peace Center, we house 3 feeding ministries over there. The Hastings Food Pantry has a storage and sorting facility over there. So anytime there's a food drive in town, like the post office does a food drive, or the Boy Scouts do a food drive and they come by with bags and you drop the cans in there, those all end up over there. And they get stored and sorted over there. And then when food needs to be distributed in food boxes, there's a building in the parking lot of First St. Paul's, that's the Hastings Food Pantry, and then that's the distribution center over there. So we've got storage and sorting over here, distribution at First St. Paul. Hastings Food Pantry was a ministry founded by this church and a couple of other churches, and was run out of our basement for a while and grew beyond that. So that's Hastings Food Pantry. There's a organization over there called Hearts and Hands Against Hunger. It's run by the Kiwanis Club, and it's a food packing ministry. They buy in bulk things like rice and lentils and some other stuff, and then groups can go in there and package them in individual packages and then box them and palletize them, and then they're shipped overseas for disaster relief and for areas that have hunger. And so out of that building, they've shipped over 5 million meals since they started this ministry, which is pretty cool. And then the 3rd Saturday of every month, we also do an event called the United Harvest Mobile Food Pantry. We receive a shipment of food from the food bank of the Heartland out of Omaha. A truck comes out, we offload the truck, and we fill the gym. And prior to COVID, it was kind of like going through a grocery store. You could walk through and get 1 to 2 weeks worth of groceries for your family. Since COVID, we do it as a drive-through thing, so the food all gets offloaded, and then we have people go through and box it, and then people drive up in their cars and we load a box into their trunk. And that's called the United Harvest Mobile Food Pantry. That requires a lot of volunteers. If you're ever interested in volunteering, it's a really easy project to do with your family. You come for a couple hours and you help feed our hungry neighbors. So if that's something you're interested in doing, let us know. That's a joint ministry we do with First United Methodist Church. So there's 3 feeding ministries over there, and then it's a community center. So we offer space to a lot of different community groups. There's a Mexican folkloric dance troupe that meets over there for their rehearsals. CCC runs some dog obedience classes out of there. We teach Spanish classes. The senior high youth room is also over there. And so we will walk over there tonight, but you'll eventually get to know that space. And whenever you hear us refer to the Peace Center, that's the Peace Center. So, all right. We'll do a real quick run through the church here and look at the chapel and the sanctuary, and then we'll sit down for dinner with the kids. Does that work for everyone? All right.